Welcome to Stuck, Time to Improv. I'm Mary Scott with Business Riff, and we have advice for startup businesses. And today, I'm very happy to have Dawn Cermak from Hey Taxi, which is a fabulous organization that both helps you with your finances and teaches you about your finances. So let's talk about taxes, particularly for startup entrepreneurs. Hey, Dawn.
Hey there. So yeah, tis the season, right? Tis the season for taxes. And first, I'm going to very quickly dispel some myths. So the first thing startups need to know is even if you're in the pre-revenue stage, you can still accumulate and write off business expenses. You don't need to have made a dime.
So you can write off the expenses of figuring out how to start your business.
Yeah, like maybe you got certified as a coach. Maybe you did like a life coach or some kind of coach training program. Maybe you took, the last 6 months to set up your computer and get your software and get your office the way that you need it. Those are all legitimate startup expenses for an entrepreneur, and you need to have kept track of them, right? A lot of people think, oh, I can only write off as much as I made. Completely not true. In fact, and a lot of people think taking a loss is a bad thing. It's not a bad thing, especially if you have a partner or yourself with W-2 income. That means you're going to bring home more of your W-2 income by recognizing those legitimate business expenses that exceeded the amount of money you made, 0 to whatever, right? A lot of female entrepreneurs, male entrepreneurs, think that or are told by their spouses that they shouldn't take their business expenses because it's going to mess with their standard deduction. Standard deduction, itemized business expenses have nothing to do with each other, nothing. Kinds of people also believe that because they have accountant, they're good. And they don't even need to listen to this conversation. And I can tell you that in a lot of cases, nothing could be further from the truth. Unfortunately, just because you have an accountant doesn't mean you don't need to educate yourself, because your accountant is only as good as what you put in the shoebox, right? So the information that, the old shoebox that we used to deliver to the accountant, right? So, I actually physically did that, stuffed everything in the shoebox and I would hand it off to the accountant. So your accountant can only work with what you hand over in the shoebox. And what accountants are, for the most part, I'm not dissing accountants, by the way, and I have a good one, there's plenty of good ones out there, but for the most part, what they're really good at is preparing your tax return, filling in the numbers with the information you provided. So you need to get educated about what information you should be providing, i.e., what are legitimate business expenses that you can write off. And you need to get really good at documenting your business expenses appropriately so that you're protected.
Even when you're just getting started, even if you don't have a checkbook program or QuickBooks or something, have an Excel spreadsheet.
Yep. And
put the date, what the receipt was for, how much money it was, who got paid for this, like what was the name of the store that you bought this stuff at, and why. So categories like office expenses or marketing. And anytime you go to a workshop or a seminar, that could be marketing. And the other thing,
and not only, now think about it, right? Not only do you need to keep track of all that information, but your receipt needs to be, I've had this happen. I used to just take all my receipts. I'd come home, take my receipts, throw them in a folder. A year later, I go back to look for my receipt. I open the folder and guess what is in the folder? Blank pieces of paper.
Yeah.
Because they fade. Receipts fade. So you want to take a snapshot. You either want to take all your receipts and when you get them in, make a paper copy of them and stick them in the file, or somehow upload them digitally. Right. You don't want to depend on and have your, again, your protection depend on blank pieces of paper in a file folder. So somehow you want to, it's really important and people don't think about it. It really is. It really is important. The other thing you need to do, because it is the #1 audit target, auto expenses. So you absolutely should be tracking your auto expenses Absolutely, because it adds up. You think it doesn't add up? 56 cents a mile.
Right.
1,000 miles added up over the course of the year would be $560 that you legitimately can write off, but you can't write it off if you haven't documented it.
Sure. And that's the date, where you went, what was it for, who did you see?
And how many
All
miles.
that stuff needs to be in the Excel file and how many miles it was. Now, sometimes your Google Maps can give you an approximation of miles, but if you don't keep track of this stuff, you don't get the deductions.
Well, the really easy thing to do is they have these mileage apps on your phone now. So you really want, if you want to help yourself, like I have one built into my Hurdler, which is my accounting program. So I have a Hurdler app. I have the mileage, and anytime I go anywhere, I get there and they say, oh, was this business or personal? Swipe left if personal, swipe right if business. If it's business, then I type in who, where, what, why, and it's right there. So it's getting calculated. Now it's getting calculated real time so that when I go to make my estimated tax payments, and for those of you who are startups, who are coming from a W-2 background, from an employee to entrepreneur, right? So you come from a W-2 where somebody else is taking care of taking money out of your paycheck and sending it to the government. Now you are that person. And you don't want to make the mistake of not thinking that's important, because it can cost you a lot of money. So to figure out how much you're sending on a quarterly basis, estimated taxes are paid quarterly. You need to make those estimated payments, and having like Hurdler, which is, we actually just negotiated for all our members a really good deal with Hurdler where they get Hurdler cheap, but having it on your phone, tracking your mileage, keeping up with your receipts. Now you have all the information on your dashboard real time. And so you know how much you owe the government, you know how much to send in an estimated tax payment. And the other thing that startup entrepreneurs don't realize is now you're now not a W-2 employee. So you're responsible for both sides of that payment to Social Security, FICA, right? Well, now that you're self-employed, you're the employer and the employee, you're paying both. It's 15%, which is a big number, and it's not getting withheld. So that 15% is coming right off the top of what you're making and not expensing, which is why expensing appropriately and tracking and documenting is so important.
Very good advice. So anything particular that women entrepreneurs should know?
Well, I'm going to give you something that's a little bit controversial.
Okay.
So, and I'm not going to say take it with a grain of salt. I'm going to say check with your tax professional, right? Because I've heard both. I've actually heard this I'm going to tell you two things. The first one is, I know a lot of women who, especially if they're presenting and their image is as a speaker, write off their hair. They write off getting made up before the event. If they did that, maybe they got fake eyelashes done. They write off everything that has to do with their appearance that day on stage, right? Okay. Some accountants might say yes. Some accountants would say no. I'm just putting it out there. It's always no unless you ask. And I was in a situation where I was on stage and I was accepting a big award. And there was somebody else, another gal that was accepting a big award too. And I said, yeah, I need to go find a dress. She said, oh, I'm just renting mine from Rent the Runway, or is that what it's called? I think it's called Rent the Runway. And I'm writing it off. I said, you're writing it off? Yeah. She said, yeah, I'm only using it once. I need to look good on stage. It's part of my whole thing. It's completely a business expense, 100%. So I'm just throwing it out there for you. Maybe, that might be a little food for thought, and that might be something you might want to ask your accountant about.
Well, this has been great, Dawn. This is the advice you're giving us, and those tips to not leave money on the table or in Uncle Sam's pocket. That's great. Thank you so much, Dawn Cermak from Hey Taxi. This is Mary Scott from Business Riff. I help entrepreneurs, particularly startups, access new markets and connect with custom resources through my business concierge services. So join us again next week for Stuck, Time to Improv.